The last thing Kael Dravenmoor saw before he died was fire. Not the kind of fire that warms a home or lights a candle. This was the kind that swallows everything. Walls, floors, memories, and kings. The throne room of his palace was burning from all four sides, and the men holding the torches were the same men he had trusted with his life for over 30 years. His generals, his brothers in battle, his closest circle. They stood in a line, watching him with cold, steady eyes as the silver chains around his wrists burned into his skin. Silver, the one weakness of his kind. They had known exactly what to use. They had planned this for a long time. Kael did not cry. He did not beg. He looked at each face slowly, one by one, and committed them to memory with the same calm focus he had used to win 40 wars. Then the ceiling fell, and the world went dark. There was silence for what felt like a very long time. Then there was a heartbeat. Kael opened his eyes to a stone ceiling covered in small cracks. For a moment he did not move. He simply listened, to the distant sound of footsteps in a corridor, to wind pushing through a gap in a wooden shutter, to the slow and unfamiliar rhythm of a body that was not his own. He sat up. The room was small and plain, a straw mattress on a wooden frame, a cracked clay bowl on the floor, a broken mirror leaning against the far wall, its surface dark with age except for one clear patch in the center. Kael looked into that clear patch and saw a child, a boy of about 12 years, with thin arms, sunken cheeks, and dark circles under his eyes, that spoke of many nights without proper sleep. There was a long scar running from the boy's left temple down to his jaw, old enough to have healed but deep enough to never fully disappear. The eyes, however, gave Kael a moment of pause. They were sharp, too sharp for a neglected child. That was because they were no longer a child's eyes at all. They were his. Kael took a slow breath and began to think. He had heard stories, ancient stories told by the oldest wolves in his pack, of souls that did not pass on after death. Souls too strong, too unfinished, too furious to leave the living world quietly. He had always dismissed those stories as the superstitions of frightened people. He was no longer so sure. He raised the boy's thin hand and studied the fingers. Small, weak. The nails were dirty, and one was broken at the root. He pressed the fingertips together and concentrated, reaching inward the way he had done 10,000 times before when calling his wolf forward. He expected nothing. He found something. Deep inside this small body, buried under layers of exhaustion and neglect, there was a warmth. Faint, like a single coal left at the bottom of a cold fireplace. Not dead, not even truly sleeping, just waiting, the way a fire waits when someone forgets to feed it. This boy had power, real power. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it never woke up. That made Kael very interested. Over the next several days, Kael moved carefully through his new life, the way a general moves through unfamiliar land, quietly, observing everything, committing nothing to action until the picture was complete. He learned the boy's name from a passing servant who slid a bowl of thin soup under the door without knocking. The servant did not look up, did not speak, simply pushed the bowl across the floor and left, as though delivering food to a stray animal rather than a member of the imperial family. The boy's name was Elion Voss, fifth son of Emperor Aldrich Voss, ruler of the Draven Empire, born during a lunar eclipse, which the empire's high priests had declared, on the night of his birth, to be a mark of ruin. They had said the boy would bring misfortune to any house that sheltered him, and so, quietly, and without any formal announcement, the imperial family had simply set him aside. He was given a room in the least visited wing of the palace. He was assigned no tutors, no guards, no attendants. He was fed when someone remembered. He was spoken to when there was no alternative. For 12 years, Elion Voss had lived as a ghost inside his own home. Kael spent 3 days learning the palace layout by slipping through corridors during the hours when servants were busy and nobles were sleeping. He watched from doorways and around corners. He listened to conversations not meant for him. He studied faces, measured tones, counted which guards looked alert and which ones were simply going through the motions. By the end of the 3rd day, he had a clear picture. Emperor Aldrich was a man in love with the idea of strength, but ruled mostly by habit and the opinions of those around him. He was not stupid, but he was proud, in a way that made him easy to manage. The right word, from the right person at the right moment, could point him in almost any direction. Crown Prince Dorian, the eldest son, was the shining center of the court. Tall, well-built, generous with his smiles in public, and precise with his cruelty in private. The court loved him because he was easy to look at and hard to argue with. Kael had met men like Dorian before. They were dangerous, not because of what they could do, but because of how many people were willing to do things for them. The three middle princes, Harren, Soren, and Colt, were each fighting their own quiet battles for the Emperor's attention, bumping against each other like ships in a small harbor. None of them were remarkable. None of them were a serious concern. And then there was High Priest Merrin. Merrin was the man who had declared Elian cursed on the night of his birth. He was old now, with white hair and a slow walk, but his eyes were quick and his influence over the Emperor was deep. What Kael noticed, and what no one else in the palace seemed to have thought about, was that Merrin watched Elian from a distance. Not with the comfortable dismissal that everyone else showed, with something sharper, something that looked very much like caution. A man does not fear what he has successfully destroyed. He fears what he has only buried. Kael began his recovery in the hours before dawn. Each morning, while the palace slept, he rose and moved to the small courtyard behind the Forgotten Wing, a space overgrown with weeds and ignored by the gardeners, and he worked. Not the dramatic, heavy training of a soldier preparing for battle, the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding, stretching muscles that had gone stiff, teaching a young body to hold itself with balance, breathing in patterns designed, according to the oldest wolf traditions, to coax a sleeping bloodline back toward the surface. He also started eating everything put in front of him, and when the portions were too small, he quietly found his way to the kitchen storage in the deep hours of the night, and took what the body needed. Not greedily. Just enough. He was not stealing out of desperation. He was fueling a project. He found the palace library by accident on his 6th day. A tall, dusty room behind a door that had clearly not been opened in months. The lock was stiff but not broken. He spent an hour with a thin piece of metal working it loose, then stepped inside and felt, for the first time since waking in this body, something close to comfort. Books, hundreds of them. Histories, law records, bloodline charts, military strategies, trade agreements, letters between long-dead emperors. A lifetime of information sitting undisturbed in the dark. Kael sat down on the floor, pulled the nearest lamp close, and began to read. He read every morning until the palace started to wake, and every evening until the candle burned low. In 3 weeks, he understood the Draven Empire better than most of its own ministers. He knew which noble houses were in debt, which generals had been quietly passed over for promotion, which trade routes had been disrupted in the last decade, and why. He knew where the cracks were. A man who knows where the cracks are never needs to use a hammer. It was on a cold Tuesday morning, during a minor court ceremony to honor a visiting dignitary, that Kael made his first contact with someone worth paying attention to. He had positioned himself at the far edge of the hall, Elion's usual corner, where no one looked and no one came. He was watching the room the way he always watched rooms now, cataloging every detail, when he noticed a young man standing near Crown Prince Dorian's inner circle, who did not quite belong. The man was dressed as an advisor. He held a leather folder and nodded at appropriate moments during the ceremony, but his eyes never stopped moving. They swept the room in smooth, regular patterns. Exits, guards, the Emperor's position, the spacing between key figures. It was the practiced scan of someone trained to assess threat and opportunity simultaneously. Kael knew that skill. He had trained dozens of men to do exactly that. The man's name, Kael had since learned from overhearing conversations, was Lord Kain. Officially, a junior advisor to the Crown Prince on matters of regional trade. Unofficially, something else entirely. When the ceremony ended and the crowd began to shift, Kaon moved through the room with casual purpose and arrived, as if by coincidence, a few steps from Elion's corner. He glanced at Kael with the brief, dismissive look that adults reserve for children who are simply in the way. "Enjoying the ceremony, young prince?" he said lightly, already looking past him. Kael did not look at him directly. He kept his eyes forward, his voice low and entirely relaxed. You study rooms the way generals study maps, he said. That is not a trade advisor's habit. So you are something else. The question I find interesting is not what you are, it is who you report to. The air in the corner went very still. Kanjay turned his head slowly and looked at the boy in front of him with an expression that passed through several stages in quick succession. Amusement, confusion, and then a careful blankness that told Kael everything. He was good, but he was also now paying full attention. Kan said nothing. After a moment, he smiled politely, nodded, and moved away into the crowd. That night, Kael returned to his room to find that someone had searched it. Neatly, professionally. The kind of search where everything is returned to near its original position. A less observant person would never have noticed. Kael had expected it. He had left nothing to find except one thing, placed precisely beneath the loose stone in the floor where any trained operative would know to look. A single page of written cipher. Not a message in any language the Empire used. A system from his previous life, one that no book in this world contained, and no scholar here could decode. Not a threat, not a greeting, a signal. To whoever sent Kan, I am aware of you, and I am not the child you assumed. The moment the wolf stirred came without warning, as such moments often do. Kael was returning from the library late one evening, when two large figures stepped out of a side corridor and blocked his path. He recognized them immediately, personal guards assigned to Crown Prince Dorian, wearing plain clothes rather than their uniforms. An informal visit then, the kind that left no record. The prince feels you have been spending too much time in places above your standing, the first guard said. He was big, the kind of big that comes from years of deliberate effort. The library, the east courtyard, the ceremony hall. He stepped forward. Ghosts should stay in their own rooms. Kael looked at him without any change in expression. The second guard moved behind him. The first one reached out and grabbed the front of his robe and pressed him back against the stone wall, not carefully. The back of Kael's head struck the stone, and white light flashed behind his eyes. And then something shifted. It was not something Kael chose. It came from somewhere below thought, below decision, from the ember in the boy's blood that had been growing steadily warmer over the past weeks of training and discipline and feeding. The thing that someone had buried 12 years ago and assumed was gone forever. It woke up. The temperature in the corridor dropped so sharply that both guards froze mid-breath. The torches in the wall brackets guttered and bent sideways, as though a wind had come through, though the air was perfectly still. Kael felt something move through the boy's body like a current. Not painful, not frightening, familiar. Like an old coat put back on after a very long time. The grip on his robe loosened. The guard took one step back, then another. His face had gone pale, and his eyes were fixed on Kael's face with an expression that was no longer professional or confident. Kael straightened slowly. He adjusted the front of his robe with two careful movements. He could feel that his eyes had changed, not fully, not in the complete and consuming way of a true shift, but enough. Enough for the men in front of him to understand, without a single word of explanation, that they had made a very poor decision. Tell your prince, Kael said, in a voice that was quiet and perfectly even, that he has made his first mistake. I suggest he not make a second. He walked forward. The guard stepped aside. He did not look back. That night, Kael sat on the edge of the straw mattress in Elion's small room and rested his arms on his knees and breathed. The room was dark. The palace outside was quiet. From somewhere distant came the sound of a night bird calling once and then going silent. He thought about fire, about silver chains, about the faces of men he had trusted. He had built a kingdom once from nothing, had united 12 warring wolf clans through a combination of strategy, fairness, and an absolute refusal to be defeated. He had ruled for 30 years. He had believed by the end that he had finally created something stable, something that would last. And then the people closest to him had shown him exactly how wrong he was. Kael was not a man who repeated his mistakes. It was perhaps the one thing he was most certain of about himself. He learned from each one with the same focus he brought to everything else, and then he did not make the same mistake again, ever. He would not surround himself with men whose loyalty he had not tested. He would not reveal his strength before the moment required it. He would not let comfort make him careless. He looked around the small, forgotten room that had been this boy's entire world for 12 years. A cracked mirror, a straw bed, a bowl on the floor. The Empire's most overlooked corner. And he smiled, very slightly, very privately, because he had spent the first decades of his previous life learning something that most powerful people never understood, until it was too late. The most dangerous position in any room is not the throne. It is the corner that no one is watching. He had a body that was already waking up, a mind that had commanded armies, and an entire empire that had not yet thought to look in his direction. He had an operative who was now curious about him, a high priest who was afraid of him, and a crown prince who had just revealed his hand far too early. He had, in other words, everything he needed. Kael lay back on the mattress and stared at the cracked ceiling above him. Outside, the night was long and cold and full of silence. By the time this empire remembered his name, it would already be standing in his shadow. He closed his eyes. The ember in his blood burned on, patient, steady, and growing stronger with every passing night.